Did you hear that whisper? Just keep moving. This place feels wrong.
The low hum of the generator echoed through the narrow tunnel, a constant, mechanical whisper that did little to drown out the creeping silence. Mark adjusted the beam of his flashlight, sweeping it across the jagged walls, the light bouncing off the rough stone in erratic patterns. He could have sworn he heard something. Footsteps, but distant. The hairs on his neck prickled. It was strange, considering he was supposed to be the only one down here. His shift was nearly over, just another hour, and he could escape this claustrophobic nightmare. But then, just as he turned to check the time, he caught it. The light flickered. Once, twice. Then it stayed off. A sudden, sharp crack filled the air. Mark froze, his breath caught in his throat, eyes wide. The generator sputtered again, and in the darkness, something moved. He turned, heart pounding. "Hello." His voice echoed down the length of the tunnel, swallowed by the stone walls. No response. He reached for the light switch, but it didn't matter. The tunnel was already dark. A whisper slid through the air, close to his ear. Too close. "Don't turn it off." A scream, sharp, sudden, cut through the silence. The sound of rushing feet. Mark's eyes darted, desperate for anything familiar. But in the darkness, there was only the feeling that something, or someone, was watching. Mark's boots echoed against the cold concrete floor of the tunnel, each step loud in the otherwise oppressive silence. The flickering overhead lights were the only sign of life in the cavernous darkness that stretched before him. His shift had just begun, but already, he could feel the weight of the mountain pressing in. It was always like this down here. Quiet, suffocating, and unnervingly empty. He pulled his jacket tighter around him and adjusted the flashlight strapped to his belt, its beam slicing through the darkness like a thin thread of light, weak but steady. The tunnel ahead of him twisted, narrowing in places, expanding in others. It was an old mining shaft, repurposed for maintenance and repairs. The company used it to store equipment, and Mark's job was simple. Keep the lights working, ensure the structural integrity of the tunnel, and check on the generators every shift. It was supposed to be routine. The mountain was known for being quiet, isolated. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stretch and warp, hours dragging on without meaning, without anyone noticing. Mark liked it that way. He had always been drawn to the quiet. But tonight something felt off. He set his gear down by the control panel and flipped open the maintenance logbook. The page was filled with the usual scribbles, the routine check marks, until he came to the last entry. Lights flickering. Generators struggling. Power unstable. It was signed off by Carl, his colleague who usually worked with him. But that was the problem. Carl was supposed to be off tonight. Mark was the only one down here. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Just after 11:30 p.m. His shift wouldn't end until 7 a.m., and the only sounds to keep him company would be the hum of the generator and the occasional creak of the mountain settling. He sighed, rubbing his eyes. The loneliness was starting to get to him again. Maybe it was the long hours. Maybe it was the isolation of it all. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the lights. It wasn't just the stillness. It was something else. Mark took a deep breath and picked up the flashlight, taking a moment to scan the walls. The rocky surface glistened with moisture, and the sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere deep within the bowels of the mountain. It had rained heavily earlier in the day, and now the mountain seemed to be breathing, shifting as though it were alive. His flashlight flickered. He paused, watching it stutter out, then come back to life. He cursed under his breath, twisting the flashlight in his hands as if it would fix the problem. He was used to electrical issues in these old tunnels, but there was something about this that felt different. The light blinked again, then stayed steady. Mark shook his head, muttering to himself. He made his way down the corridor toward the main junction where the generator stood. The deeper he went, the quieter it became, as though the very air thickened, absorbing sound. The darkness pressed closer around him, swallowing the beam of his flashlight. He turned a corner. That's when he heard it. A soft rustling noise from somewhere in the dark. A scrape, faint but sharp, like something being dragged across the ground. Mark froze. It was coming from the service shaft, the one that led deeper into the mountain, a place nobody had reason to visit for years. His eyes narrowed. It could be nothing, he reasoned. Just a rat, or some debris shifting in the wind. But something in the air felt off. The scraping sound stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Mark strained his ears, waiting for the sound to return, but it didn't. His breath caught, and he felt his chest tighten. Just the wind, he whispered to himself, but his voice sounded thin, uncertain. He didn't believe it. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He wasn't alone. He was sure of it now. Something was moving out there, something that didn't belong. He forced himself to take a step forward. And then, click. The lights went out. Complete darkness. Mark's heart slammed against his ribcage. The tunnel, once an unbroken line of dimly lit concrete, was now a cavern of shadows. His hand trembled as he reached for the flashlight, but the beam was weak, flickering in and out, struggling against the oppressive void around him. "Damn it," he muttered, thumping the side of the flashlight. It flickered again, barely strong enough to cut through the dark. He took a few more steps, his breath quickening, every sound amplified in the silent mountain. Click. The light died. His mind raced. The power shouldn't be out. The generator had been fine when he last checked, and the backup systems had been fully operational. Mark took a step back, his foot catching on something in the dark. He couldn't see it, but he knew it was there, something foreign, something out of place. He took another step. Something scraped against the floor, close. Too close. His pulse quickened. That noise again. It was too deliberate, too purposeful. The flashlight came back on for a moment. Mark's breath caught as he saw something. A shape in the distance, a silhouette moving, impossibly tall and thin. The beam caught only the outline, just enough to send a chill down his spine. It was standing perfectly still. "Who's there?" Mark's voice cracked, the words sharp and terrified in the cold, empty space. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint echo of his own words. Nothing answered. But then he heard it. Barely a whisper, but it was there. "Don't turn it off." Mark's stomach churned. The words didn't make sense. His hands shook as he reached for the light switch, but before he could, the silence took over again. And the darkness deepened. The darkness was overwhelming. Mark stood in the center of the tunnel, his flashlight trembling in his grip, the beam struggling to pierce the thick, unnatural shadows. The whispers had stopped, but the feeling, the presence, lingered close and suffocating. He couldn't see it, whatever it was, but he could feel it in the very marrow of his bones. The silence pressed in, deafening, as if the mountain itself were holding its breath. He swallowed hard, his heart hammering in his chest. The whisper from earlier, "Don't turn it off," echoed in his mind, a warning that no longer seemed like an isolated incident. Had it been a trick of the mind? Or had someone, been here with him? The logical part of him screamed that it had to be the result of fatigue, the isolation, the strangeness of the environment. But another part, a part that was growing louder with every passing second, told him that whatever was in the tunnel wasn't an illusion. It was real. It was waiting. His flashlight flickered again. Mark cursed under his breath, shaking the flashlight as if it could somehow restore the connection to the real world. The tunnel was so still, so suffocating, it felt like the air had turned thick, congealed, like the weight of centuries of stone had wrapped itself around him. The light came back on for a split second, illuminating the metal panels of the tunnel walls, the damp patches that clung to them like scars. He could smell something now too, a strange, sour odor like something had rotted deep within the bowels of the earth. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it made his stomach lurch. He took a cautious step forward, but the very act of moving felt like a betrayal. Every footstep echoed too loudly, every breath seemed too harsh, too urgent. He wanted to leave, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The tunnel stretched out, endless and consuming. Mark's eyes darted from side to side, seeking anything familiar, anything that would remind him that he was in control. There had to be an explanation. The lights, the whispers. Maybe there was a malfunction in the generator. Maybe the power grid was short-circuiting. He could fix it. He had to. He forced himself to walk toward the service shaft where the generator was located, though every instinct in his body screamed for him to turn around and run back to the safety of the entrance. But as he moved, the sense of being watched grew stronger, like eyes were on the back of his neck, every step heavy, dragging him deeper into the mountain's suffocating embrace. Then, just ahead, he heard it. The scraping again. Closer this time. Louder. The sound of something or someone moving just out of sight. It was unmistakable now. Something was moving in the dark. Mark stopped dead in his tracks, his chest tight, breath shallow. He could feel the temperature drop. A cold sweat trickled down his spine as his hands clenched the flashlight harder. He tried to steady his breathing, but his lungs wouldn't obey. The scraping continued, growing closer with every passing moment, relentless and slow. "Who's there?" His voice broke the silence, too loud, too desperate. He cursed himself instantly, the words feeling weak in the cavernous dark. His only answer was the ever-growing scrape. Metal against stone, methodical, patient. "Get control," he told himself. "Get control." He backed up toward the junction, his flashlight beam flickering erratically as he turned in every direction, half expecting to see something, or someone lurking just out of view. But there was nothing. The scraping stopped as abruptly as it had started. He felt a momentary sense of relief, but it was quickly overshadowed by a deeper, darker realization. The mountain had swallowed the sound. It had taken everything, leaving only silence. The weight of it crushed him. It was as if the mountain had become a living thing, slowly and carefully wrapping its fingers around him. Mark took another step. Then another. It was then he heard it. A whisper. So soft it might have been a trick of the wind, but no. The words were unmistakable. "It's not safe." Mark froze. His heart slammed against his ribs, his ears ringing as the whisper lingered, hanging in the air like a haunting breath. He turned slowly, the beam of his flashlight darting frantically over the walls, expecting to find someone, or something, watching him. Nothing. He stumbled backward, the beam of light flicking wildly before settling on a figure in the distance. It was a shadow, no more than a silhouette against the jagged stone, a presence so unnatural it burned into his mind. For a moment, he couldn't move. The figure stood at the far end of the tunnel, unmoving, a grotesque outline against the darkness. Its size was impossible. Too tall, too thin, and its proportions were wrong, distorted in a way that made his stomach churn. Mark's breath caught. His hand tightened around the flashlight. It wasn't human. Who's there? His voice was a rasp now, barely a whisper, but it didn't matter. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there as though it had always been there, waiting. For what felt like an eternity, Mark stood frozen, watching the shape. But then, without warning, it moved. It didn't walk or run. It glided toward him, impossibly fast, as if the very air itself bent around it. Mark's body went cold, his legs like lead, unable to take a single step back. The flashlight flickered and died. The last thing he heard before everything went dark was the faint whisper again. "Don't turn it off." The next thing Mark knew, he was lying on the cold concrete floor, blinking against the dizziness that pulled at him like a tide. His head was pounding, his limbs numb. His flashlight was gone. He pushed himself up, gasping for air, his chest heaving. The tunnel around him was still, as if nothing had happened. No movement, no shadows. The generator hummed in the distance, a steady, mechanical pulse that somehow felt alien now. But there was no mistaking it. The air was different. Thick, oppressive, like it was closing in around him. Mark's thoughts raced. What had just happened? Had he imagined it? Had it been a trick of the light of his mind? The figure, was it real? He stood unsteady, his mind whirling. The whispers were gone, but the feeling of being watched remained, pressing against his back like an invisible hand. He moved forward, step by hesitant step, drawn deeper into the bowels of the tunnel. Each sound, each scrape, was louder now, more distinct. The walls felt like they were closing in, like the mountain was alive, alive and waiting. Something was down there. Something was watching. And it wasn't going to let him leave. Mark couldn't breathe. His lungs fought for air, the pressure in his chest growing heavier with each passing second. The tunnel stretched before him, winding and narrowing as though the very walls were shifting to block his escape. His mind screamed for him to turn back, to leave, but his legs refused to obey. Every step felt like it carried him deeper into the earth's suffocating grip. The mountain seemed to be swallowing him whole. The hum of the generator, once a comforting background noise, now sounded warped, like it was being distorted by something else, something far darker. It thrummed in his skull, vibrating through his teeth, pulling his every thought into a single horrifying conclusion. He wasn't alone. It was close. He could feel it now. It was here. Mark's flashlight was gone. His hand trembled where it still clutched the useless dead beam. The darkness pressed in from all sides. It wasn't just the absence of light that frightened him. It was the weight of the silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty but suffocating, alive with things you can't see, with the things that the mountain kept hidden. And then came the sound. A dragging, scraping noise, impossibly close. Mark's heart stopped. It was the same sound, the one that had followed him, the one that had echoed through the tunnel, always just beyond his reach. But now it was here, just behind him, scraping its way toward him like a monstrous thing made of shadows and hunger. Who's there? His voice was hoarse, ragged. He didn't care anymore if someone heard him. There was no one else down here. There couldn't be. The scraping continued, relentless, like claws scraping against stone, moving closer and closer. His breath hitched. It was coming for him. Mark spun around, the darkness swallowing him whole as he turned. And there, standing at the far end of the tunnel, was the figure again, the one that had haunted his every waking moment since the lights first flickered. This time, it wasn't a silhouette in the distance. It was real, solid, massive, a thing of nightmarish proportions. It wasn't human. It was wrong. The thing loomed, impossibly tall and thin, like a monstrous creature that had been stretched too far, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. Its face, if you could even call it that, was a warped blur of features, a smudge of blackness where eyes should have been, a gaping mouth that stretched too wide, too far. And there, in the center of its chest, a faint light, flickering, dim, glowed like a dying star. It tilted its head as if studying him, as if he was some kind of specimen, some creature to be observed. The mountain held its breath. The air thickened around Mark. His heart pounded, deafening in his ears. He couldn't look away. He couldn't move. Then, from deep within the thing's throat, came a voice. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a low, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through his very bones, like the growl of an animal that had never known peace. "You shouldn't have turned it off," it said, the words distorted, layered with something ancient and terrible. It was a voice that was not human, a voice that had never known kindness or warmth. Mark took a step back, stumbling, his legs giving out beneath him. His body was screaming at him to run, to escape, but the fear had rooted him to the spot. The thing took a slow, deliberate step forward, and the tunnel seemed to contract around him, the walls pressing in as though they were closing in on him, trapping him in its presence. "No," Mark gasped, the word barely a breath. "I didn't mean." "You didn't mean." The thing's voice slithered through the air. "You never mean. But you did. You turned it off, Mark. You did this. You're the one who woke it up." Mark could feel it now. The weight of the mountain pressing against him, suffocating him. It wasn't just the thing before him. The mountain was alive. It had always been alive, waiting, shifting beneath the surface. The whispers, the dragging sound, the flickering lights, they had all been the mountain's way of telling him, warning him. He had thought it was just a malfunction, just his mind playing tricks on him. But it was never just that. It was something much darker, something ancient, buried deep within the rock. The thing took another step, and this time Mark couldn't stop himself. He backed up into the wall, his hands scrambling for purchase, but there was nothing. His breath came in short, sharp bursts, his pulse pounding in his throat. "Please," Mark whimpered, his voice cracking. I just wanted to finish my shift. I didn't mean. I didn't know." The thing loomed closer, its presence suffocating, its eyes, if they could be called eyes, flickering with an otherworldly hunger. It leaned in, its breath of foul, cold wind against Mark's face. He could smell something rotten, something that belonged to a place where light never reached. And then, in the silence that followed, the thing whispered again, but this time it wasn't a warning. It was a promise. "You're never leaving." Mark's heart seized. The words echoed through him, reverberating deep in his chest. There was no escape. Not now. Not anymore. The walls around him seemed to breathe. The floor shifted beneath his feet, as though the mountain itself was rearranging. He could feel the ground beneath him slipping, the air growing heavier, suffocating. The world around him distorted, everything spinning in a spiral of confusion and panic. The tunnel seemed to fold in on itself, the space twisting, stretching beyond any logical measure. He was trapped in its grip. "No!" Mark screamed, his voice breaking. But it was too late. The light in the thing's chest flickered violently, and the mountain groaned as if it were waking, shaking with a deep ancient fury. The thing's hands, long twisted fingers, shot out, grabbing him by the throat, pulling him forward. Mark struggled, gasping for air, his vision swimming as he was drawn closer to the thing's gaping mouth. And then, with one final sickening twist, it whispered into his ear, its voice cold and final. "You're part of it now." Mark's last breath was swallowed by the darkness, consumed by the mountain. The tunnel was silent once more, save for the soft hum of the generator in the distance, the only remaining echo of a man who had dared to turn off the lights. The sun had barely begun to rise over the mountain when the rescue team arrived. It was a small group of workers sent to check on Mark after his extended silence. The mountain had swallowed him without a trace. No calls, no responses. They'd assumed it was just a delay, a missed message, maybe a technical malfunction. But as the hours stretched into the morning, they began to worry. They stood now at the entrance of the tunnel, blinking into the light that barely touched the jagged rock face. There was a coldness in the air, an unnatural chill that hung around the entrance, wrapping itself like a shroud around the workers. Their boots crunched against the gravel, the only sound in the otherwise still morning. Tom, the foreman, stepped forward, glancing nervously at the entrance. He'd worked this mountain for years. He knew its dark corners, the places that whispered of old, forgotten stories. He knew about the mines, the accidents, the strange things they never spoke of. But this was different. "Mark's been down there too long," Tom muttered, shaking his head. "Something's not right. We need to find him." One of the younger workers, Jason, hesitated. "But we can't just go down there. You saw the reports. Something's off." Tom grimaced but said nothing. The reports, the flickering lights, the strange messages Mark had left behind. All the little things that didn't make sense, adding up to a bigger picture that none of them wanted to see. They entered the tunnel in silence. The air inside was thick, oppressive, like it had been waiting. It felt wrong, as though it had been disturbed, its balance shattered. The faint glow from their lanterns barely illuminated the walls, casting shadows that shifted and twisted unnaturally. Tom led the group down the narrow passage, his hand on the wall for support. The deeper they went, the heavier the silence became, the more suffocating. Mark's absence felt like a presence, looming just beyond reach. It wasn't the absence of a person. It was the absence of something that had been there, something that had been taken. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, the walls curving in on themselves. Time didn't make sense here. It was as though the passage stretched into another world, one where nothing could be trusted, where nothing was ever truly stable. They had only gone a few hundred meters when the first sounds came, soft like whispers that slid in and out of the dark. None of the men spoke. None of them dared. They turned a corner and found the generator room. The generator hummed quietly in the corner, still functional, as if nothing had happened. The lights were on. They flickered faintly, but they were working. But something else caught their eyes. A figure was lying in the corner of the room. It was Mark. His body was still, lifeless, crumpled on the floor. His eyes were wide open, staring into the distance, unblinking. His face was pale, his mouth slack as if he had been caught in the act of speaking, his last words frozen in the air. But it wasn't just his body that felt wrong. His presence, his absence, it was all wrong. Tom knelt beside him, checking for a pulse, but he already knew. There was nothing. His fingers brushed against Mark's cold skin, and the sensation sent a ripple of unease through him. Mark's hand was clenched into a tight fist, as if he had been holding something that was now gone. Jason stepped forward, a hesitant whisper escaping his lips. What happened to him? What could do this to him? Tom didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stood up, scanning the room. The walls seemed to shift under his gaze. The darkness was thicker now, pressing in from all sides. The air felt colder. It wasn't just Mark. The mountain was changing. He could feel it. He could see it. The walls were no longer just stone. They seemed to live, breathing with a deep ancient rhythm. The tunnel stretched before them, endless, impossible. It wasn't meant to be this way. The shadows, they weren't shadows. They were something else, something that had never been part of this world. Tom's heart hammered in his chest as he turned to face his men. The others were already stepping back, retreating toward the exit, their eyes wide with fear, with confusion. But they couldn't leave. Not yet. He had to know what had happened to Mark. He stepped closer to the wall, his hand trailing along its surface. The coldness seeped into his skin, and as he touched the stone, he felt something shift. The mountain responded. He jerked his hand away, staring at the wall, his breathing shallow. And then he heard it. A whisper. Soft, distant, but unmistakable. You shouldn't have turned it off. Tom froze. His eyes darted around the room, his pulse racing. The whisper was everywhere. It filled the air, the walls, the very rock beneath his feet. It was alive. It had always been alive. Mark had heard it. It was the same voice, the same words that had driven him mad, driven him to turn the lights off, to cross the line into something he could never escape. You're part of it now. The voice was closer this time. Tom's breath caught in his throat. He turned to face his team, but they were already backing away, their faces pale, their bodies trembling. They didn't understand. They didn't see it. The mountain, the thing that Mark had tried to escape, was still there, waiting. The men reached the tunnel entrance, and Tom turned to follow them, but he stopped. He turned back toward Mark's lifeless form. Something wasn't right. Something in the air was growing darker, more insistent, like the mountain itself was reaching out to claim them. His heart beat loudly in his ears. Tom, let's go. Jason shouted from the entrance. We need to get out. Tom hesitated. He knew. He knew they had to leave, but he also knew that there was something they couldn't outrun. Not here. Not in this place. With a final, shuddering breath, Tom turned and ran, following the others as they fled the mountain's grasp. The whispers followed them, fading with each step, but lingering, always lingering. The mountain had taken Mark, but it wasn't done. It was never done. They never spoke of it again. The records were filed away. The team was told it was an accident, a tragic loss, a mishap in the system. But Tom knew better. He could feel it, the coldness that never left him, the whisper that echoed in his mind, the dread that settled deep in his bones. And sometimes, when the wind howled through the mountains, when the night felt too still, he could almost hear it again. Don't turn it off.